our guy. We like to call him Johnny Matches. His name is Jon Machota. He covers the Cowboys for The Athletic. John, what's happening, man?
Nothing, man. Just, breaking news going on here. Cowboys making moves. That's what we like to see.
Right. Okay, so let me ask you, because I'm always intrigued by this. How quickly do you kind of get inklings that something like this is happening, and then at what point are you like, all right, I need to change whatever I'm doing, get into that mode to figure out more about what is involved with this?
It's funny that you asked that because I've been covering the team for 13 years, and I would say almost all of the time there is very little lead up to anything when the Cowboys actually do that. And when I say that, what I mean is we see on all the big, TV shows and all that, whenever there's a big time free agent, like they like to link them to the Cowboys. And in my time covering the Cowboys, those players never, not once, not twice, never end up with the Cowboys. And it's usually the deals that come out of nowhere, the ones that the Cowboys have done. Amari Cooper during that bye week came out of nowhere. Obviously, the Cowboys needed a wide receiver that year. Nobody knew that they were going to go after Amari Cooper the way they did. The Trey Lance thing last year, where did that come from? Nobody thought that they would be in on that. The Stephon Gilmore trade. I would say you might have had a little inkling on Brandon Cook's trade a year ago just because they had made some efforts to try and get him before the trade deadline the season before. But there's just so many moves that the Cowboys have made that they really don't really leak anything out. And so usually when I see that people say, this person's talking to the Cowboys are fit here, I almost am conditioned to just kind of turn it off. Cause I'm like, well, that means they're not going to the Cowboys. They've done a great job of keeping things under wrap when it's a notable player that they're going after.
John, speaking of surprising things, not only did they get Eric Kendricks, but they steal him from the 49ers. What do you think went into that, and why did they not just pursue him in the first place if this is the guy they knew they wanted?
I think the key to all of this is, one is Mike Zimmer. I'm sure he made an effort that, really sent the message to Eric that he could probably have a bigger role here than maybe in San Francisco, because the key with San Francisco is Dre Greenlaw. Obviously, anybody that watched the Super Bowl saw that Achilles injury he suffered. And so when you see an Achilles injury, you're thinking, who knows what the timeline is on this? He's probably going to be out a while. And so from our writers that cover the Niners, it sounds like that he could potentially be back earlier than some thought. And so I think maybe that factored in where, instead of Eric Kendricks going into the season with the Niners, hey, I'm going to have this huge major role next to Fred Warner, to where it might be maybe a month or two in the season, you might be number 3 once Dre Greenlaw comes back. And while that's still great on a Niners team that's loaded, I think his fit in Dallas and the thing where, I don't think you're getting the 2019 All-Pro, but what I do think you're getting is veteran leadership and somebody that I think can still make plays on the field. But the big part about it is there were communication issues with the Cowboys last year. They had young linebackers after Leighton Vander Esch went down. And I know you guys have heard people talk about the green dot, and it is so important who is wearing the green dot. That means they're wearing the radio in their helmet. They're doing the communication with the defensive coordinator. And they had some issues with that last year. I just think Eric Kendricks comes in, he wears the green dot, he's on the same page with Mike Zimmer, and he gets everybody in the right spot so you don't have those communication issues again.
Johnny, one of the things with this team is we know the MO is that they don't do things early on in free agency. That's known. But typically, at the very least, you can lean on them kind of keeping a lot of their own guys. And it seemed like there was a mass exodus to Washington of all places. And so for both myself and Blake on this program, we kind of asked ourselves, what are they expecting this team to look like? Because, they still have so many gaps that I don't think you can fill simply through the draft, and I don't even know that you can fill really adequately just late in free agency. What does it feel like the Cowboys are expecting this team to be capable of doing this upcoming season?
I think they feel that this experience of the last 3 years, with most of those key players still back, will eventually lead to them getting over the hump in January. Because I know, when they don't do any moves and nothing's announced with the Cowboys during the first 2 days of that negotiating period, people get all up in arms because it's everybody else is making the moves. Why aren't they? Well, the Cowboys don't make moves around this time. And really, I think the only reason that it was magnified this offseason is because of how many times Jerry talked about all in. If he doesn't talk about that, I don't think there's as much of a magnifying glass on the Cowboys not doing things, because it's kind of business as usual for them. But when he says all in, it gets people thinking differently. And so because of that, this really wasn't a different offseason. They were going to fill some holes with guys like Eric Kendricks, and then so that they can go into the draft and then fill some other key spots out, which I still think that that's their plan. When they lose, a Tyler Biadasz to Washington, I do think the plan all along, going back to just conversations I had with people in Indianapolis during the Combine, their plan is to address center in the draft. They went with a young center with Travis Frederick, rolled that into going with a young center with Tyler Biadasz, and you're getting growing pains with a guy like that. But I just feel like that's been their plan. Talking to our guy that is our draft expert at The Athletic, Dane Brugler, he said center is a really deep position in this class. I think they address that there. But I think that first-round pick is going to be the main key. That's where you're going to fill your major hole on your offensive line. So if you can do all that in the draft, the main thing that's left for me wondering is, okay, what do you do at running back? And so you can get a running back in the draft, but I just find it hard to believe that they still don't add some type of a veteran here in free agency, so you're not going in the draft as it's a must, so everybody just knows you're taking a running back in the second or third round.
Yeah, kind of staying on linebacker in the draft. How do you think this Eric Kendrick move affects? Are they still going to be taking a linebacker higher? Do they think now they have that position filled? Is that something they're still going to be looking for in free agency? Has the priority changed at all with this Eric Kendricks signing?
It probably does a little bit, because you probably would be forced to take a linebacker at some point in the first few rounds, just if you didn't, because the key is DeMarvion Overshown coming off that ACL injury. He might be fine and he might be great off of it, but it might be some gray area there. It might take them a little, time for him to get kind of caught up and get through that injury. You don't know for sure how a guy's going to react to that. And so I do think they were going to need depth at linebacker in the draft. But with Eric Kendricks, one-year deal, you can still draft a linebacker in the second or third round, and it still makes sense. I just think the Kendricks thing's so important because with the uncertainty with Leighton Vander Esch, that's such a young linebacker room. And adding another young guy through the draft, you need a veteran in there to kind of be the leader of that group. And I just think that with Kendricks, it takes some of that responsibility away from a Damone Clark or Overshown, or let's say, they in the second round went after like Junior Colson or something out of Michigan. Like, those guys obviously were leaders in college, but stepping into that immediately year one, year two in the NFL is a different thing. Kendricks kind of bridges that gap.
We're talking to Jon Machota. He covers the Cowboys for The Athletic. And John, there's a few extensions that it seems like the Cowboys it would behoove them to get done. When we talk about Micah Parsons, we talk about CeeDee Lamb, and of course the quarterback Dak Prescott. And I know Jane Slater has done some reporting on how there hasn't even necessarily been conversation when it comes to the Dak Prescott deal as of yet. How likely does it feel like any of them, all of them, are to get done sooner rather than later? When it comes to these extensions.
I'll say this. Before going to Indianapolis, I would say I thought Dak would get done first, then CD, and then Micah. And now I have CD ahead of Dak. I think that that could possibly take a little bit longer. But when I say all that, I'm also saying it in a way that I don't see a future where all three of those aren't Cowboys. Mm-hmm. And even if that means Dak plays his final year under his contract, I think that they will find a way to get something done with him. And I just think both sides will eventually come together and be like, it's best for both that we stay together and keep moving forward. For people that don't like Dak or people that think that he can't win in the playoffs or whatever, I've thought, and I know they think, that it could be way, way, way worse without him. And I don't see them going in another direction at quarterback. No matter what they say, no matter if we go into training camp and he still doesn't have a new deal done, it still won't change my thinking on him being the quarterback of the Cowboys for the next 4 or 5 years. And I feel that absolutely the same way with CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons as well. And those are three guys. Those are their main reasons why they won't be active in free agency, is because they don't want to do anything to jeopardize their chance of re-signing all three of those. Because I really do feel if they felt like they weren't going to re-sign one of those three, I think you'd see them maybe being more active with, going after like a Christian Wilkins or somebody at defensive tackle to fill that major hole. But it's hard to give out a contract like that when you're trying to give out 3 contracts that'll be all in that neighborhood and probably more to those 3 players.
What have been your thoughts going back to free agency on how the other NFC East teams have kind of retooled themselves and in broad, just the NFC in general?
Well, Washington and New York, they've been that step down under Dallas and Philadelphia, and they're making moves to make their teams better. I just don't know that they'll make enough moves that closes the gap. I still believe that when we get to the start of the 2024 season, I'll feel the exact same way as I feel right now, and that it's still Cowboys, Eagles for the division, and the Giants and Commanders are probably still another year away. And a lot of that with those two teams depends on what do they find at quarterback. You know, all these other pieces are great, but if you're them, you got to find that franchise quarterback before you know can you really compete to win this division on a consistent, not a fluke 1 year thing, but you have to identify that quarterback. And obviously Washington, it would be a stunner if they didn't do that with the second pick. And so if they get that right, Washington can close that gap real quick. If they get that pick wrong, that gap will probably widen. So I don't look at Washington and New York as on the same as Dallas and Philadelphia. Just like when some of these other teams make moves that have money, I don't necessarily look at those teams the same way I look at Dallas, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Detroit, and Green Bay. Like, that's the class of the NFC. Even with the Cowboys not doing much in free agency, the Cowboys are still going to be in that mix. It would have to be this crazy rash of injuries to knock them out of it. I mean, there's a reason that they've won 12 games each of the last 3 seasons. That's not easy to do. I understand they fall apart in January. That part needs to be addressed. But to act like that this team is just going to fall apart because they weren't active in free agency, I just don't see that happening.
John, before we let you go, it does seem like there's a lot of, and obviously the coaching contracts make this very evident. There's a lot of people that are kind of aligned on making this year being really important on where they go and how this thing happens. And I mean, you add Eric Kendricks, I imagine is going to be another 1 year deal. Obviously, his age factors in, but there's some folks that are looking around, and could the Cowboys be setting themselves up for possibly like a soft retool or something? Do you view it in any way as if that's a possibility in their thinking, or maybe not?
You know, it's tough to say that because I guess you could term it as that, as a soft retool if you're moving around some pieces. But I just look at it as if your key pieces are Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, there's just a basement there that just it's higher than most teams. Like you're not going to fall below a certain level because you have quality players at 3 very key positions in today's NFL. And so as long as they have those guys, I don't see this being a complete retooling. There might be, massive changes to the coaching staff, but when you say retooling, one of the first things I think about is it reminds me right now kind of the first year I was on the beat was 2011. And that was Jason Garrett's first full year, and that was when they started turning things around on the offensive line, and they had to get younger there, and they had to rebuild that thing because they got too old. And so that's when they drafted Tyron Smith, and then eventually took Frederick and Zach Martin. I feel they're there with, like, the offensive line. I feel like that's kind of – we'll see them probably take an offensive lineman in the first round, I feel like, and maybe another one within the second or third round. That part I see it, but defensively, as long as you have Micah Parsons – you're going to be a couple pieces away from that being one of the better defenses in the league. And as long as you have a healthy Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, like, this team's not falling off to all of a sudden where you're just like, yeah, it's just a 6-win team now. Like, that's just not happening.
John, appreciate you as always. Jon Machota of The Athletic. And I guess I can hope your Blue Devils do a little bit okay in the ACC tournament. That won't hurt nobody, I guess.
It is fun being a Duke fan because so many people hate them and they love to tell me about it. But that's fine. I like being the villain.
That's right. But you handle it so nicely. In fact, it would be better if you didn't, so the text would go over better. But we appreciate you always giving up your time to talk with us about the boys. You have a wonderful evening, my man.
Anytime, fellas. Have a good night.